Hello, everyone. Welcome to Christians Questions, a project of the New Tolerance Campaign. Today, I have a great guest, Mr. Paul Rossi. Paul Rossi was a high school teacher who was forced out of Manhattan Grace Church School in 2021 when he wrote a piece for Barry White's Substack exposing leftist indoctrination at the school. In 2022, he continued to expose gender ideology, equity, grading, and BLM at school curriculum and education for legal insurrection. He teaches currently at the Vertex Academy, a values-based charter school in Bronx, New York, and he co-founded the Terra Firma Teaching Alliance, hope I'm saying that correctly, a peer support network for traditional teachers restoring their profession. Paul, how are you doing this morning?
Great. Sunday. Every teacher loves a Sunday. So,
Of course, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. So my first question is there anything that you're working on right now that you'd like to tell us or our audience and inform us about?
yeah, definitely. When I left Grace Church, when they gave me the boot after I didn't want to go to their restorative justice session in 2021, I thought I was done. I wasn't going to teach again in New York. And I'm very pleased to say that I started this year at a charter school in the Bronx, run by Ian Rowe, who's a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute. And we have a very different model for teaching, and it's really then is very faddish right now in schools, and that is, we do direct instruction, and we have a values-based framework for the kids. So courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom are the character virtues that we promote among the students, and we reward them for manifesting. And I think this is has a big leg up on some of the elite schools, which are pushing a very different mindset in their $60,000 a year clientele.
Yeah, well, tell us more about your experiences at Grace Church, which I briefly mentioned in your bio, for those who aren't
Mhm.
familiar, and kind of tie that into how it set you on this trajectory to kind of work in the education system to better.
Well, I started as a teacher. I was a career changer, so I started in 2012 in my 40s, and I loved it. I love teaching high school kids, the ninth grade, and we taught 9 through 12. And Grace Church School is, in many ways, a wonderful school. It has great resources. It's very well funded. Um, it has a lot of independence for faculty. But on another level, I started to see 2015, particularly after Trump got elected, George Floyd, a whole lot of very dangerous practices start to creep in, particularly in the psychology of the students. And I became fascinated by it, disturbed by it. I would question it at times, but I was always sort of told to, you know, keep my mouth shut and check my privilege, essentially. But I started to see it have some of the worst effects were on the students of color, the way that they internalized a set of grievances. They would come in ninth grade, and there's cultural problems, right? So if you have a student who is from a very different neighborhood than a lot of these other kids, and they get told that they are struggling with an oppressive system which wants to shut them down at every turn. Well, of course, they're going to look for those things in their environment. And it was not healthy for them. It was not healthy for the white students, who started to get a lot of internalized racism from this idea of white guilt, which is another project that I'm involved with. I've been involved with Shelby Steele and Eli Steele's documentary about white guilt, which I think is coming out soon. And so I was really disturbed by a lot of specific practices, and your viewers can go read the piece. It's up on the Free Press. It's called "I Will Not Stand By While My Students Are Indoctrinated."
That's very good. And so, speaking of education and indoctrination, American education has really come under a lot of scrutiny over the past few years, especially with things like the 1619 Project, which many folks considered race indoctrination, or the more recent controversies over age-inappropriate books in school, which has caused an uproar with a lot of parents. Loudoun County, the critical race theory stuff over there. What do you think is the current state of American education at the moment?
Well, it's very interesting. I think it still uh, hasn't really found this solution yet. And that's because education has been a kind of a dog and pony show for all kinds of grifters, corporate, government for decades now. And it's hurting the kids. It's hurting their learning. It's not right for them. And this transcends the culture war problems. Okay. So a lot of it has to do with the pedagogical style. So I'm a more traditional teacher. The teachers in my network are more traditional. That doesn't mean that we don't do inquiry, but that the core purpose of teaching is to give knowledge, okay? Knowledge in terms of how to read, how to write, cultural touchstones, important things about history. And the fad for the last 40 years in progressive education has been about inquiry. So, the typical classroom, lazy classroom that you will see today in the progressive schools, which are now in all the government schools and many private schools, is the teacher, ask the kids, what do you think about, this period in history or this current cultural moment? And then they put up a lot of post-it notes of what the kids think, and then the kids talk about it and they sort of decide what they like. But it's essentially a mirror of what they already know, which is very little. Okay. And the kids are told that you are the expert. You go and you do your research. Of course, the research is on Google, which is itself a self-selecting platform of facts and information. And so it really is, it has so drifted so far afield in terms of what teaching is supposed to do for the child and for society, that we really need to get back to a more traditional. Now, people have a lot of myths about direct instruction. They think that it is, one way, the teacher's groaning on and the kids are copying down. Absolutely not. In direct instruction, when it's done well, the teacher's constantly interacting with a child and all the children in the class. There's so much more interaction than in a quote inquiry classroom, because the teacher has to know that the student knows what they're learning. So they have to call and response constantly. And so these myths that have been spread by progressives about traditional education, that this is the first thing that needs to sort of be addressed. And it's starting to be addressed. I've noticed in the last 6 months on Twitter, these pedagogical um, myths are starting to be addressed by a lot of good teachers that I consider to really know what they're doing.
Yeah, and this may be going a little bit into the weeds, but I'm actually quite interested in the history of education and everything. And when you said progressive education, that sparked a realization that I think one of the biggest critiques of progressive education in American history is that, and you tell me if this is your understanding as well, if you agree with it, is that education takes sort of the instruction-based model of the teacher, and it infuses education with the need to educate the kid for society. It makes education socially conscious. And people will tie it
Mhm.
back to John Dewey and the progressive era reformers, and they'll say this is the point where American education started to take a turn, where the door for indoctrination was open. Do you agree with that thesis at all? Would you add anything to it?
Yeah, I agree with that thesis. I also think that there's some good to that, right? Like you do have to create a cohesive society, okay, in order, and that means having very much a traditional. Not every student has to agree with it. I'm not saying they're all robots, but you do have to have some foundational principles. If you were doing that in terms of what the you could do that about the founding fathers, you could do that about the traditional touchstones of America, right? And I think most people on the right would see that as a good thing, as do I. The problem is, when you you take that sort of, you take that and you give it to a bunch of experts, and so the expert class in the progressive era took over the levers of bureaucracy. They took over this, and so it took a long time, right? Because you still had a lot of, teaching was not a government business so much then, but now it is. And so there's a massive bureaucracies and millions of people and massive amounts of dollars, and you have this you have a particularly ideological leftist ideological commitment on the part of, and you're right, it did open the door to that, right? So there is a way to see society, social touchstones is important, right? You want to have a shared culture, or at least a kind of shared sense of values. Not, if not culture, we could still have potentially a multicultural, a society,
Yeah.
but that we have shared values.
Absolutely. And so there's been a rise talking about education in the sort of homeschool your kids movement. And that has made me think as we try to talk about the politicization or the wokeification, so to speak, of education, is the solution going to come from us in society? Is it going to come from our politicians? Or will it come from both? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think it has to come from people first, and homeschooling has increased dramatically. I think, I heard a figure that 10% of Black families homeschool, which I think is really great. And I think that there has to be a rejection of a failing system. And I think the amount of time, just being a teacher in both public and private now, the amount of time that's wasted, uh, that I hear from other teachers at other schools, that's wasted. Uh, it's extraordinary. And then you hear reports from homeschooling parents that, they can do more in 2 hours than the school does all day. And so that students who have just been um, so ill served by government education, okay, like the students that we teach. All right. I'll be honest. Our students are some of them, I would say a large chunk of them are 2 or 3 grades behind grade level. The the proficiency rate in the neighborhood in which I teach is 7% for math. Okay. So these are disasters. These are catastrophes. These are national embarrassments. Okay. And so how do you fix that if you have a completely self-serving bureaucracy, completely self-serving union, that pats itself on the back for the most idiotic nonsense? How do you start to move away from that? You cannot do that from within. You just can't, right? So you have to have these alternatives, and parents have to be able to opt out. Okay, now I have a lot of concerns about the quote unquote school choice movement. Of course, I believe that school choice is good, and that parents should have a choice where to move their tax dollars. I agree with that. However, the protections within a contract relationship at private schools for parents are far less than in a public system. There is no school board. Okay, they can have anything they want in the contract. If they don't like you, they kick you out. And the idea of this sort of beautiful market of an unlimited number of schools ignores a lot of the elasticity problems. Right? How easy is it? Ask any parent how easy it is to pull their kid out of school and move them to another school. It's not easy. They have friends there, right? So once they got you, they kind of got you. Um, and so, and also, like, there's not an unlimited number of schools within a particular geographic area, right? And then who's funding these schools? And then if you get a bad reputation in your neighborhood, because the school doesn't like your politics, for example, they talk to each other. There can be effective cartels can happen within a market system. So there are a lot of issues that I think are concerns. I'm not anti-school choice by any means, but I think people really need to be aware of these pitfalls.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And so my last question is, if you could look into your crystal ball and you could see maybe a few years in the future, where do you imagine the state of American education will be if things continue to go on the trajectory that most people believe that they're going on right now, and the level of sort of resistance from parents and critics remains at the same level, or it returns back to like pre-Loudoun County levels? Do you think that it's going to become more decentralized? Is it going to worsen? Is the future Generation Alpha, going to become possibly even worse than what we've seen over the past few years? What's going to happen, do you think?
Well, I'd like to be optimistic, and I think I'm locally optimistic. I'm generally pessimistic. So what do I mean by that? I mean that um, I think parents who take a positive role in the raising of their children, okay, there has to be a movement. There has to be an authentic, organic movement of parents to take back control of their rights and their responsibilities to raise their children correctly within a system which is constantly trying to claw conformity and trying to claw obeisance from them. So, for example, you have parents. I went to a parent chapter in Pennsylvania and in rural Pennsylvania, like sort of just across the border with Jersey. And the parents there did not have a lot of money. They were, I would say, middle class, lower middle class, or firmly middle class. A lot of their parents worked both double income, and they pulled their money. They kicked in $10,000 each. They scraped for it, after paying the property taxes and school taxes and so on. And they were able to create a pod, right, with 6 groups of parents, and the kids would go, maybe 6 to 10 kids would go from one house to the other, and they made this work. Okay, now this is from people who don't have a ton of resources. Um, they can't pay for independent tutors and so on. Whereas from the wealthy parents in New York City, I hear many complaints that, oh no, we can't homeschool, right? Now, if they can do it, you can do it. So the problem is status. So status is a huge problem among the elites. And until something sort of catches on, I would say, that has that kind of status or has like an acceptable status level, you're not going to see homeschooling catch on. So I will really look to see, in many ways, like there's always going to be elites, and elites in many ways, they kind of do set the tone, no matter what what everyone else does. And that'll get them more visibility. So I would like to see more wealthy parents opt out of the system and not sacrifice their children's psychological health to get them into Harvard.
Well, well, thank you so much for that. And that leads me actually to one more question. I'm curious now that you mentioned Harvard and the problem of status, because this appears to be a problem that a lot of people endorse by basically saying, I want my kid to go to an Ivy League university, although I'm not sure ever since like the Felicity Huffman scandal, how much that's gone down. I don't have any reading of that. Maybe you
Not
do.
much.
But
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's unfortunate. But so yeah, like why do you think there's that perception that if you go to like an Ivy League or a top 50 or a top 100, there's all this educational
Yeah.
terminology for
Hmm.
it. Why is there this perception that that is what you need to have a holistic, fulfilled education? I never understood that. I myself went to a college called Mercer University in Georgia. It's like a regional school in the South, but I got the best education that I put myself in the position to get. And that's how I saw it. You
I
know,
agree. I mean, I tell parents this all the time. What do you think you're getting? What they're getting is they're getting a brand. Okay. And there are great parents out there who care about whether their children are well educated or not. But I will tell you, with that's like priority number 3. Okay. And that's sad. But that is also the state of, a system of striving which has become credentialized, and these institutions have risen, and there will always be elites, and they will always have their status. It's and what happens is, as luxury brands in an economic system, as a luxury brand starts to get hollowed out, right? Maybe it's like I don't know handbags, but let's just say, like, I don't know, Givenchy or Gucci or something. Let's say that the stitching doesn't work as well and that the material isn't as good. But if there are no alternatives at that status level, right? There is no alternative to Ivy's status within the social system of prestige. Okay, so um, it's going to take a while for people to see that these things are getting hollowed out, and they can get great educations in schools all over the country. And to be honest, it depends so much more on the individual student. Most of these colleges offer plenty of opportunities for a student that is ready to take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, so it has much more to do with the student than it does with the millions of dollars in facilities and opportunities and so on. I mean, it does matter some, but like if you are a striver, it is, there is plenty for you to accomplish at many of these schools. So, but it's going to take a while because we don't have we don't have prestige because it takes hundreds of years to establish that prestige. So Harvard's been around since 16 whenever, right? Yale, Harvard, Cornell, all of these places. I just threw Cornell in there because I went there, but it's really not as good as these other ones. But you get it. So the idea is like you have to have an alternative, and so University of Austin is an attempt to sort of start that process, have some alternative, but it does not play within a group which also has created the status system that they benefit from. So all the other people at all the financial firms and all of these places that went to Harvard, they have to prop up their own status. I think it's ridiculous, but I also understand human nature, and I know that status is not going to go away anytime soon. All you can you just it needs to be reframed. You need to have alternatives. It takes a long time.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Is there any last words you'd like to leave with our audience at all before we go?
I would just say, parents, I would say pay very attention to what your children are learning and don't pay attention to grades. You need to independently assess what your child knows. Okay. You cannot trust an A. You need to you need to ask them and understand what really counts, which is the knowledge that they have, because ultimately that is that's the treasure beneath all of the social status and all of the labels and so on. And you want them to know things and take advantage of that knowledge. And that's what's important in education.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, and I hope that everyone else watching this has a good day.